Well, thank you all for your interest in learning more about the Texas P3 marketplace. I'm pumped to share the microphone with my great partner and frankly, my mentor in all of the opportunity that we've had over the past several weeks through the P3 workshops, Michael Gardner. Michael, thank you for spending time to do this. I think it's an important opportunity for us to introduce the functionality, use cases, and impact of what we are discussing with both public and private sector interest. For our presentation, I'm going to give a little bit of the background of the drivers and kind of the current conditional landscape that we have found in Texas, not all to be precise in completing what we've done in the way of an assessment, but at least it gives you, our audience and interested partners, an opportunity to see where we began this process of forming the P3 marketplace. I'm going to hand it over to Mike, who's going to show you some of the functionality and the depth of the tools, and then collectively we'll present a pilot program for collaborating. Now, we began this idea of the marketplace on some simple objectives. Could we create an efficient, effective, and economical solution or a platform that provides an integrative and collaborative means of working across public, private, and philanthropic interest, not just in Texas, but around the United States, that would look at flood and risk mitigation projects in a new way. However, we began to identify what we thought were some challenges and opportunities. There's multiple interests, multiple programs, and multiple assets across the state of Texas that by doing flood and flood mitigation sometimes are not well known to each other, even if they're adjacent, and or they could be projects that, because of their scalability, could amount to being multiple of hundreds of millions of dollars in an investment opportunity. But because there's these multiple interests, there's also multiple criteria, impacts, and requirements for achieving success. That means there's also multiple data sources, modeling, and rankings across engineering firms, consultants, and the agencies themselves. And last but not least, there's multiple funding sources. Many are obvious to you that are listening and observing what we've presented so far in the P3 workshops, but there's also some funding sources that you may not be aware of, some that we've even discovered along the way. So when we talk about multiple interest in programs and assets, what we see is the opportunity to take the Texas P3 Resilience Marketplace and provide it to you as a supporting, strengthening, and augmenting your efforts, whether it's the Texas Clearinghouse or a platform that you have at the county or local level. Second, because of the multiple criteria, impacts, and requirements, we feel very strong that this platform can support your regulatory compliance, operational, and most importantly, the performance-based criteria and requirements for achieving the right level of a P3. And Mike will share some of the insight in a bit. We also see the opportunity to bring hydrological engineering, gauge, sensor, monitoring, and some new insights for loss and financial mitigation. So while there are sources of data inside the public sector, we have found and identified additional data partners, data sources that could supplement and, if anything, again, strengthen and augment your mission. And because we've mentioned multiple funding sources, we've identified a whole range of private sector and philanthropic alternative funding, everything from foundations to the insurance industry. So, as Mike will describe when he walks you through the process of developing and delivering the marketplace, we began at identifying the selection process for the projects, leading to additional funding, scenarios, and opportunities. And last but not least, again, how do we implement and report from what we bring to the table through this platform and what are required for you, the public agencies, to meet and address either legislative or regulatory requirements for reporting. So, how do we do this process? And again, Michael will show you specifics and examples of how the workflow operates. But as you can see, we've attempted over the past several months to identify the market gaps and the unique opportunities, as you previously saw, which allows us to assess currently where federal, state, local project grants, contract, and funding initiatives stand, meaning we do not see this as competitive. If anything, again, it's collaborative, because we've tried to spend time with you and others and your colleagues to really identify what your goals and missions are. But then how do we connect all of the different projects? We do not intend to take away from the existing public required platforms or your intentions. We propose to create an API, a technical link, and upload various projects that need access to what we refer to as launch stage resources, gap financing, matching dollars. That is, we will focus on the private and nonprofit projects first and foremost to create a whole landscape perspective with you on your public projects. Third, we'll connect available data and sourced data from rankings and models, meaning we will find a way and have already identified, as Michael will share, significant data and ways to enhance your rankings with additional insights that the private sector or nonprofit investors may be looking at. So our data flows start with a baseline of impacts as well as performance outcomes. And Michael will show you how those rankings can be added in dimension and scale. Fourth, we'll integrate the characteristics, criteria, and description, meaning we will post the extensive amount of information, descriptions, the drawings, operational, project delivery for financial review. What does an investor seek to have to make a decision whether to invest, but also to track the return on their investment? And last but not least, we're trying to go for the gold, and this will facilitate, we believe, increased amount of P3s and alternative project implementation by establishing search and match scenarios for clients, customers, and end users, leading to more efficient investments. But also, it will provide performance reporting for financing payment criteria. Simply, if I'm going to make the investment, have you met the criteria for being paid on those investments, whether it's through the grant or a contract program? So we've mentioned several funding sources. Obviously, the federal level, the state and local are the ones that you know about. Plus, we've actually begun to identify some interesting incentives and new programs that tend to maybe not be on all of our radar. And then we bring to the table the corporate equity in the insurance financing. And these are examples from Blackstone, Prudential, Aon, Macquarie, individuals and family offices, coupled with nonprofit, foundation, and impact investors. Who knew that the Nature Conservancy runs a public-private partnership funding mechanism? But we also know that locally, nationally, there are a number of corporate and family foundations, impact investors, and even an organization that many of you are aware of, Qualified Ventures, that have come to the table to support the expansion of flood and risk mitigation. So simply, on one side of the ledger, there is the public sector. On the other side of the ledger, there is private and nonprofit funding, we intend and have already found ways to bring these together. So Michael, with that kind of as a initial setup for your sharing of where the platform is and some examples, I'm going to turn this over to you now and let you go very strongly and deeply into what Achaix has been working on, not just in Texas, but around the country.
Great. Well, thank you, Richard. I'm going to start sharing my screen. And as that is populating, let me just say that the Clearinghouse, we think, is a really great resource for funding for resilience projects, and the agencies behind it are working really hard on getting great projects financed with the funding that they have available. But we think that there are many other types of projects that can be really good projects, but are going to need supplementary funding. And let me give you a few examples of those types of projects. There may be some that are evaluated and ranked by one or more of the agencies as being great, but across all the agencies collaborating, they may not be quite good enough to be able to get into the end game. And so they end up orphaned, if you will, and looking for financing. There may be projects that are ranked high, but the agencies may run out of funding and run out of resources to be able to get to them. There may be projects that require matching, and so part of the process becomes finding, the sources of capital that can be used for that matching funding one way or another. There may be projects that are better accomplished within the private sector or by a non-governmental entity or through a P3. And then there may be projects that just aren't seeking public dollars, but they're really seeking, alternative forms of financing, basically. And we think that all of these can be ways that for all these types of projects that the marketplace can help complement the clearinghouse. And what we are looking at right now is actually the Texas P3 marketplace. We have put in some demo projects. So I want to emphasize these are examples of the kinds of projects that you might have, but they're not real. They're just hypothetical synthetic projects that, will give you the idea of what the software can do. Right now we're in the project catalog, and so we're looking at thumbnails of each of these within the catalog. And in a minute, I'll open up a project and show you some of the functionality within a given project listing. But you can see that it's really easy to be able to sort and filter the projects. So if I click and I just want to look at the flood mitigation projects, or if I want to be able to search and only look at, I want to find a particular project by a label or by a tag, it's quite easy to do that. This demo just has 8 projects in it, but you could imagine a situation in which there are dozens and dozens or even hundreds and hundreds of projects basically. And so this ability to filter across a project taxonomy and the ability to search and find projects quickly becomes really important. Now let me go ahead, let me also explain before I open it up a little bit about what's happening within the thumbnail. So we can see a very short description of the project. We can see an image, of course. We can also see some other information, including what the estimated cost is. And then we can see the scores, which show the construction confidence, the financial confidence, the environmental benefit, and the social benefit. I'm going to be talking in a few minutes in a lot more detail about these scores. I'm not going to exactly explain them now, but I will in a few minutes go into a lot more detail about how those scores are obtained and also other scores that we can quite easily implement that could be important within the marketplace. I'm going to go ahead and open this project up. And again, this is just a hypothetical project. But you can see that, at a glance, there's a summary of that, and whoever authored this particular listing has put in a very concise summary of what the benefits are and what the strategy is, basically. And again, the scores, and then we show on a map where it is. If I wanted, I could open that up and expand that if I wanted to get more precise about that. One of the advantages of the marketplace is that all the information is in one place in a secure location in the cloud with not only really great security, but with really great control over who can see and access the information. For different pieces of information or different projects, it could be set all the way from completely visible to everyone and the public, or it could be set all the way just to only members of an agency. Also, there are life cycles to the project so that there's an ability to curate a project privately, and then when it's ready and everyone agrees, okay, now it's ready, then you can go ahead and publish it. But that standardization of the structure of the information is really important, and the transparency in being able to rapidly see all the details of a project so that you can understand it are really very important. In addition to the project basics, we have a page showing the organization. One of the first things that any funder wants to know is who is behind this project. You know, who's and how solvent are they, or how experienced are they? What kinds of partners do they have, basically within either the private sector, the public sector, or within nonprofits, basically. What's their operating budget? Things like that. I mean, these are all really important ways of being able to evaluate what, by the way, in this case, is just this hypothetical agency that that is kind of proposing this project. We also store images and videos. This is very important for a few reasons. One of them is that it can create an emotional connection to the project, kind of. I mean, it gives you context, basically, because if you didn't have this, you only have basically a spreadsheet and some numbers, and it's really hard to kind of place like, oh, well, that's where it is, or that's what the project is. But images and videos can also be part of community collaborations to do citizen science type efforts and to collectively compile information and annotative information about a project. They also can be used for forensic purposes too. And so the ability to store the images is a very important capability. We also have a complete data room. This can host literally any kind of project document, excuse me, and it can also host as many documents as you want. Typically on a lot of these projects, there are multiple versions of, say, the engineering plan, the permitting documents, the financial documents, and so forth. And they usually go through many, many different iterations, and keeping track of that and keeping track across the different organizations that are collaborating on this, including potentially and likely engineering firms and legal firms, in addition to the agencies, becomes really clumsy and really quite expensive if you're emailing, attachments around with the latest version of the document, and keeping track of who has received which version and so forth really becomes quite a pain and quite expensive. So with the data room, everything is conveniently located in one place, organized according to the project that you're in.
Mike, can I emphasize something real quick, because I think this is an important note, and that is that many of the projects, especially when they're in a large watershed, are required to have the support and approval of multiple governments, multiple sub-agencies, even multiple beneficiaries. So I think this is a great point, that when you're trying to collect approvals and support from 30 to 150 different agencies, project owners, I think this is something that we shouldn't overlook as being a great tool. Sorry to interrupt, but you just emphasized something that I thought it was worth sharing.
Well, it's a great point, Richard. Thank you. Yeah, no problem. It's a really great point. I mean, these transactions do get very, if you're not careful, the transactions can just get very expensive, and the more parties involved and the more types of documents you have to keep track of, the more constituents and so forth, the harder that becomes. We also have a tool that allows you to see at a glance the financial history of the project. This is really important if you're considering funding into, a project, because you might realize that, oh, this is actually, the development stage of it, but I want to know who was involved with the initial concept, who provided the funding and what type of funding was it, or I want to know who did, the basic economic planning, basically, and how much money did they spend on that? Was it a an adequate amount of investment for the task at hand, or was it not, basically, and so forth. And so this tool makes it very easy to see at a glance that history, but it also allows you, if you drill in, I'm not going to take the time right now, but it also allows you to track key dimensions of those fundings, basically, for example, conditions of the financing and things like that you can be used in other ways later. I had said I was going to talk about these scores, and I'm going to do that. But first, I want to show you an example of one of the most powerful parts of our architecture, which is our ability of our software architecture, which is our ability to integrate data from virtually any source. And this is a very large database, and it happens to have data. And I just picked this as an example of our ability to integrate data. But the point here is that we can create custom dashboards that show virtually any type of analytics you want to see, whether those are pre-investment evaluation analytics or whether they are post-investment monitoring analytics, to make sure that you have accomplished the objectives of the actual investment. And to populate those dashboards, we can bring in data from literally any source. We can bring in data from federal agency databases, such as the EPA or USGS. We can bring in data from state databases, from regional and local databases, also even from spreadsheets. And of course, there are many new open data sets that are freely available and many really interesting data sets that have geospatial imaging and so forth. And we can work with all of that data. And typically what we do, and I'll show you an example in a minute, what we do when we configure a site, a marketplace such as this, is we work with the constituents to understand what data we want to integrate in. And then we do that. And we would do that as part of the pilot to bring in some data sets that are specific to Texas, to the Houston region. Now, with that understanding of the data integration, let's go talk about these scores basically. So we have some default scores that are based on our machine learning models to compute these various things. But what we can do in our software architecture is add literally any type of icon that you want, and you can have literally any type of score that you might want to compute. So for example, if you want to be able to keep track of projects that have benefit, you want to be able to keep track of the benefit cost ratio of a project, and you've developed the means and agreed upon the ways that you're going to compute that, and you're collecting that information across all the projects, it would be it's simple basically to have that visible here, so that every time you see a project and every time you're going through the lists of projects, you're able to see, well, this one has a great ratio, this one has a terrible ratio. Another example is if you have to keep track of specific targets or goals of the investments, such as benefiting certain demographics. Perhaps it's a low income group in certain regions, or could be many other types of things. But anyway, it's really easy to be able to define the calculations that lead to those, and then bring in the data, and then be able to show that at a glance, so that you can keep track of whatever it is you need to do. Now, I want to give you a sense pardon to any vegetarians, but I just want to give a sense of the sausage making of doing that. So I'm going to show you an example of what another one of our clients has been doing. They are working on a portfolio of 16 stormwater projects in the Monterey Bay area of Central California. Basically, they need to raise about $70 million of financing, and the primary issue with stormwater in this area is nutrient runoff, nitrogen and phosphorus. So the particular thing that they're focused on is, what is each of these projects going to do in terms of reducing the runoff of those nutrients? And they've quantified that for every project. We can see the value for the whole portfolio and so forth. But they have also gone beyond that, and so they have quantified other secondary water quality benefits. They have also quantified water supply benefits, because in this area of California, there's actually is not enough fresh water, and anything any of these projects can do to help facilitate freshwater production and recovery for drinking water and for ag is a huge benefit, basically. So they've quantified that. By the way, there are many scientists associated with this effort to do this work. So these are all scientifically based models and so forth. They also have computed the flood protection benefits of each of these, as well as some additional benefits, environmental benefits, and then also some social benefits in terms of job creation. And this is what they did, but you could choose to be able to use some models that you might have developed that are being able to show local GDP improvement, or perhaps it's going to be jobs within particular demographic sectors that you're targeting, basically. So the point is that we can use these models, whatever models you want to develop. Let me just give you a quick look. This is actually their marketplace that they're using. And again, here are the 16 projects basically that they're using, and they're going to be coordinating the 70 million, using our software and coordinating the $70 million fundraising effort. Going back to the marketplace though, I just wanted to give you a quick look at being able to just a quick look at what it is to create a project, basically. So I'm going to show you, if you wanted to create a new project manually, basically you can, if you wanted to give someone the ability to type the information in so that you weren't having to spend the time yourself, but the software can enforce constraints on the data to make sure that it's all well structured and all there, basically. You would give them the URL, and basically they can just go to that URL and they can create the information, and then you can review that. And once you decide that it is that it's available and ready to be published, you can go ahead and click it to be to be visible. We also have the means to import projects wholesale from databases or even from spreadsheets. So wherever it is that we need to bring projects in from different sources, we have that capability basically just to make it easy. And again, once it's there, once they're all in the marketplace, all the information is stored in a very standardized format. And it makes it really easy, much easier to be able to go across the projects and compare. Just to wrap up, Richard and I have been running these workshops on resilience finance, and we've been bringing in world-class experts on different topics. If you have some time to be able to go back and look at the videos, they're really interesting and very worthwhile. But I'm thinking of what one of the guest speakers said on one of the last sessions. Her name is Ellery Monks. She's an expert in P3 finance. She runs something called the Atlas, which is a community of practice which involves over 3,000 U.S. Local government entities that are all sharing best practices on running local government. And P3s and finance are a very big part of it. And Ellery had some really great tips and advice and suggestions. But at the end of the day, when she wrapped it all up, she said, look, you have to have a way to make all this efficient, to be able to do all this, to use this tip, or to be able to bring the projects in, to be able to work together, to be able to evaluate them, to be able to route them to the right funding source, or to be able to realize that, hey, for this project, we really need to bring this party together along with that engineering firm, along with that nonprofit, and they're the ones that really need to take this, and take it to the next level in terms of the planning and then getting the funding. And what we have designed the software for the marketplace to be is really that, the software platform in the cloud that can make it efficient to do all these things. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Richard.
Mike, that is excellent, and it reconfirms all the reason why we're excited and honored to work with you and your team. Let me just highlight a couple of things that you said, and then we can conclude on the idea of a pilot demonstration project. I want to reemphasize something that you shared and that we've heard over the past 6 to 7 months. With all of the billions of dollars that are still available in Texas, the fact is it's still not enough to do all of the flood and risk mitigation required in a growing state. So as you suggested, there may be projects that rank high, but not high enough to be funded with some of the state or county local dollars. Or frankly, they're great projects and they are ranked high, but they become orphaned, so to speak, when the funds run out. The other in the extreme is that there's a lot of projects that require a non-government match or could be done best through a public-private philanthropic solution and or best done entirely by alternative resources and not a public dollar. So our offering through the Texas P3 Resilience Marketplace is to unleash and unlock all of these alternative resources that we think could stretch the appropriated legislative and or other taxpayer dollars in their intended impacts. So we are not seeking to jump ahead or compete with the public programs, whether it's the flood infrastructure financing, the GLO distribution of CDBG MIT money and the presidential declaration dollars, or any of the bond programs by counties and cities. What we're looking for is what happens to projects that really are important and valuable, but may not have the resources to achieve success, or frankly, projects that may be best done by a public-private partnership. Speaking of the platform, what we looked at was how do you build, and I think, Michael, you articulated very well that there's multiple layers here, everything from providing critical insights, and you can read faster than I can share this, but it's, context of the project goals, real-time impacts, first layer. Second layer, How do we build confidence? It's because it's the completeness of the information. It's the integrity of the source, and it's supported by subject matter experts. Third layer, we're addressing the compliance and governance issues, tracking the ongoing performance, the rule and regulatory filing data that may need to be captured in one place. And as I mentioned, we're trying to find a project management solution that engages multiple stakeholders. Finally, it's a scalable project. Speaking of multiple stakeholders, it does address that there are often multiple project owners at various stages. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of documents that are required to be shared and notated. And because we're working in a cloud setting and across a number of different agencies, programs, funders, it provides a secure and protected platform. So Michael, with that, would you introduce what our offering and our opportunity is?
Sure, Richard. So we know that this is a little bit new and may take a little bit of experimentation, and we want to make it as easy as possible for all the agencies that would like to give it a try and like to participate to look at it, use it, and so forth. And so we're offering a 6-month complimentary pilot period of zero charge for unlimited usage for as many users as each agency might want to bring in, and as many projects as each agency might want to bring in. That includes support and includes maintenance and includes training. So, our goal is to just make it as easy as possible for all the agencies to assess whether this is the right tool for them. Of course, we're biased. We think that we think it has a lot to offer, but we recognize that every agency needs to evaluate that on its own merits, basically, and we want to make it easy to do that. So that's 6 months of zero cost usage, basically, to be able to do that. And we think that that should be definitely a long enough time to go through that and give it a try. And by the way, and if you're interested in that, you could contact either Richard or myself. We'd be happy to talk further about that.
Well, Michael, this has been great. And I know you and your team have spent an inordinate amount of time over the past several months, not only perfecting the platform, which I'll add a couple of things. We didn't mention the capability of the artificial intelligence. We didn't mention the capability of some additional data recognition and tools. So rather than overwhelming listener, we're prepared to sit down and brief you and your colleagues within your agency. I also want to note that we've been having pretty extensive conversations with the insurance and reinsurance sector, who look at this platform as another means of connecting dots. And we've been talking with a number of private investors who see this as better insight to where there are multiple ways to place significant resources. And as we move into 2021, there's a new legislative session coming up, congressional, new administration. We see that this whole focus on green infrastructure and water infrastructure is only going to increase in attention, and we hope that this will serve as a resource for those. So with that, Michael, thank you so much, and we look forward to all of you connecting with us and finalizing the opportunity to launch the pilot. Thank you.
Thank you.